Welcome to this edition of Vantage Point. Here in the Connecticut Conference, we have a vision. And that vision is based on the understanding that we, in fact, need one another, that we are dependent on one another, that we are connected by a bond that God holds us together in covenant with one another. And today we're going to explore that sense of covenant with two of my colleagues who are here to talk about their new call to conference ministry. Today I'm pleased to have two guests with me on this edition of Vantage Point, the Reverend Deborah Blood, who's the pastor of the First Congregational Church in Bloomfield, and the Reverend Gordon Rankin, who's the pastor of the Congregational Church in Naugatuck. Welcome to this edition of Vantage Point.
Thank you.
So Deb and Gordon, you have new calls, and I'm very excited about these calls because you are going to be joining me at the table of the Council of Conference Ministers. And so I'd like you to tell our audience what your new call is and what you're excited about regarding that call, and I'll start with you, Deb. Deb.
I have been called to be the conference minister in the Maine Conference of the United Church of Christ to begin in September. I am excited about their vision for moving forward together. The conference has been working under their interim conference minister to create a plan for becoming an interconnected, interdependent organization. And my main charge as their conference minister is to help create this interconnected, interdependent way of being together as churches and as a conference.
Excellent. Thank you. Gordon, tell us about your call.
And I have been called to be the conference minister in the South Dakota Conference, a wonderful collection of 80 churches over many, many miles. 5 associations, 4 which are pretty traditional to our Connecticut associations, and one that is quite unique. It is the Dakota Association, and it is a collection of 13 Native American churches that functions in a very fun, unique way, where everything basically happens at the association level. The association calls the pastors, they pay the pastors, so just a whole new way of being association.
Excellent. So I wonder if each of you would tell me what you're excited about, what are you looking forward to, and maybe what you think the challenges that lie ahead. Not that we can know all of those in advance, but what do you think some of the challenges will be? So what are you excited about, and what do you think your challenges will be in your respective conferences?
I'm excited because, like South Dakota, the Maine Conference is huge geographically, and I'm excited to be in a space that is just a larger canvas to work on and be creative with. So there are 160 churches. About 28 of them have full-time pastors, so it is an entirely different way of being a conference from the Connecticut Conference. I'm excited about creating the connections between and among churches and people, going out to the margins. There are counties in Maine that are some of the poorest in our country, and there are some that are quite well off. How to be the church when there are great differences in the availability of resources. I'm grateful that there's no room for denial anymore in the Maine Conference about where the church is headed. And they're already doing remarkable work. They're not waiting for their next conference minister to come to figure out new ways of doing ministry, supporting ministers, having lay ministers. They've created a new school for lay people to learn to be licensed ministers. So I'm excited about heading out into an area where the creativity is ripe and growing.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think there's actually a lot of similarities between the setting where Deb's going to be and where I will be. South Dakota is rich with just such a diversity of churches. The majority of them are in very rural settings, and so part of what excites me is just helping some of these smaller churches that will always be small churches. One of the things we talked about is that a small church is not a failed big church.
Right.
And help them discover how you can be both sustainable and vital in a smaller church setting. One of the pastors I got to talk to this past weekend when I was in South Dakota was talking about living in a community of 750 people, and you're in the heart of Lutheranism. That church is never going to be anything but a small church. but they're looking for ways to innovate and be vital in the community they're in. And that's a piece of work that really excites me, with the diversity of churches. Wonderful camp and conference center in South Dakota. I will put it up there on the level of Silver Lake, and I know that you also are gifted with one of those as well.
Pilgrim Lodge. Fabulous.
And we're beginning some conversations in South Dakota that I think are cutting edge in the church about how we do some mutual ministry with other conferences. I know that's stuff that's starting to happen in New England, and we're starting to do it particularly regarding staffing between South Dakota and Iowa and Nebraska.
Yes. Excellent, excellent. So let's talk a little bit about this call for each of you. You have been nurtured and led in this conference in really fine ways. Deb has done a lot of things within the conference. Well, actually, both of you have been very active and involved in the conference. Deb, you've been part of the Columbia Partnership. You've been on our conference board of directors in the national setting. You've been involved in wider church ministries. I know, Gordon, you chaired a search committee a while back.
I recall that at some point.
And have served in Silver Lake, been active in the Korean Partnership and with our youth, and been on the board of directors and moderator of the conference. So you two have been as involved in the wider church. How have those experiences helped prepare you for this ministry calling? Did you always, when you woke up in the morning, when you got ordained, said to yourself, I'm going to be a conference minister someday, or has that evolved? So talk a little bit about your call to this specific form of ministry. Gordon, why don't you go first?
Why don't I go first?
Because I went first before.
So I think my answer is both and. I had a friend remind me a couple months ago that in my ordination bulletin I had a line about conference ministry perhaps being something I'd one day want to explore, and I had totally forgotten that was in there, but it was kind of a fun reminder. But it's really been my experiences in the Connecticut Conference and in the churches I've served within the conference that have really kind of shaped me for this opportunity. The search committee that called you was a huge piece of that, particularly at the time when we were writing our conference profile. I remember spending day after day after day working on wordsmithing and making sure we got things right. And the more I did that, the more I kind of was like, but yeah, this is really kind of what I want to be doing. Obviously, I had a commitment to see through at that point, both to my church and to the conference, but it was something that just stayed in the back of my mind as something I wanted to continue to explore. The Korean Partnership also has had a big piece in why South Dakota. The appreciation I've gained from that about what other cultures have to teach one another and how we learn from one another is a piece that excited me in going to South Dakota and looking at the Lakota peoples and what we have between those two sets of churches, learning from one another and how we can really give gifts to one another as churches from different cultures.
Excellent, thank you. Deb?
I've been aware that ever since I was in seminary that God's call for me was into the whole church, to the local church, but also to the wider church. And it started with my local church, my first church in Essex that raised me up. And I was a consultant to congregations before I even went to seminary. So I've always had an interest in the structural business side of church. And so I went along knowing that God called me first to the local church, but I've always had two tracks going, and have loved both. And so when it came to I've been in my local church serving for 10 years, and I opened to God's sense of call, it became clear to me that I wasn't feeling pulled toward another local church. And that's when I opened up to whether there was some other place God was calling. And it appears that all those years in the wider church are coalescing so that now I'm a conference minister candidate, not even a candidate. What am I,
Conference
elected?
Minister elected.
Elected.
Both of you are
Yes.
conference minister elected. And Gordon, you begin your ministry in South Dakota in
mid-August, August 16th.
Mid-August. You'll be at General Synod, I know, coming up in a couple of weeks. And Deb, you begin your ministry?
In September 1st.
September
in Maine.
1st. So So we are grateful to both of you for your leadership, for answering this call to conference ministry to serve in a new capacity, in a new setting. It's our hope in the Connecticut Conference that we help nurture and develop leaders for the wider church. And so you two are an example of that, I believe. And we are grateful for your saying yes to this call to, in a time where conference ministry is challenging, but also filled with great blessings. So I want to wish you from the bottom of my heart Godspeed as you go into these new positions. And I have the additional blessing of continuing to work with you on the Council of Conference Ministers, as together we serve as leaders in the national setting to try to make the United Church of Christ a more just, loving, and compassionate denomination. So I wish you Godspeed in your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Vantage Point. Please join us next time. We wish you God's grace, mercy, and peace. Amen.
Okay, put that in the B-roll.
That's good.